Hi there, this is Steven Gonzalez. How are you doing today? In any DAW, if I don't know where things are, it can become a really frustrating experience very, very quickly. And to alleviate this, I'm going to introduce you to some of the major parts of Reaper, and that's what's next on Reaper for Voice Talent. In this video, we're going to be tackling, of course, the major parts of Reaper, but along the way, we're going to be talking about also what Dockers are and their advantages, and they're really, really cool things about Reaper. And then finally, we're going to be looking at the Reaper Theme Adjuster. This is something that's new with version 6, and it is an extremely powerful part of Reaper now. Now, if this is your first time within this video, especially if this is your first time within Reaper for Voice Talent, do me a favor and like this video, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell, setting it to all, and watch the video all the way through. In fact, watch it a few times because there's so much in here, and I don't want you to miss a thing. And with that, let's get started. Here we have a Reaper project, and this is somewhat typical, to be honest, of what we see as Reaper users. We're going to be starting from the top with the title bar. A title bar is that thing that in any Windows application you'll see it, but Reaper does something really special with it. It has the project name, and whether it's modified or not, in this case it is, and it disappears if you save. Then we have the version and the architecture of the Reaper version that you're using, and then if it's licensed or not. Now, beneath the title bar, we have what's known as the menu bar. And the menu bar contains, of course, the menu, but the menu is pretty extensive, as you can see. One of the cool things about Reaper is that there are many things that you can do to change, and the menu is one of those things. If you don't like what you see as far as the menu is concerned, then you can literally sit there and wipe out what's there, which I recommend that you save off what's there before you just wipe it out. But you can start from scratch and build your own menu system for Reaper. And Reaper has a great many things in it that does that. And we're going to be getting into that in a future course video. Then to the right of the menu is what's known as the undo button. I say button because it doesn't look like a button until you hover over it. And all of a sudden, there's a shading area. Now, if I click on this button, it pulls up the undo history window. This is exactly what it was. It goes from initial state all the way to where we are now. Something like an Adobe Photoshop, for example, there's an undo window, and you can select a certain place, and you can right-click, and you can say, remove everything that's beyond this, so that the undo only goes from the initial state to where you are. Now, I know some people who do this, and some people who just allow the undo history to grow infinitely as they do the project, so that way they're aware of what they did. So that's the undo history window. All the way to the right is another hidden button, but it also is an information screen about how Reaper is using your interface. In this case, it's 44.1 kilohertz at 24-bit depth, wave format, doing 2 channels potentially. The block size is 1024 samples. There's some latency numbers, which we're going to get into latency in a future video. And then we have the audio system that is selected, and it should always be ASIO. Beneath the menu bar, over here to the left again, we have what could be considered your best friend. This is the Icon Toolbar. If you do an action repeatedly within a project, or if you do one action that spans multiple projects, then maybe that action is a good candidate to be included into this Icon Toolbar. And I say the Icon Toolbar. Actually, it's one of many. If I right-click on the clean space over here somewhere, and I pull up the context menu for the toolbar, and I say Switch Toolbar, watch what happens. You'll realize the main toolbar is one of 17, and they're all completely configurable, just as with the menu. We can throw away everything that's in this toolbar right now and start from scratch and make our own. And in fact, that's what some people do. For example, toolbar 1 is all about recording. Toolbar 2 is all about editing. Toolbar 3 is all about processing. Toolbar 4 is all about rendering and shipping or whatever it is. So that's the power of it. And then some music producers, they have other things that they have here. Beneath the Icon Toolbar, in this empty space here, this is what's known as the track control panel. And it contains track controls, which is what this is. You'll note that there's a lot of empty space in here, and that's purposefully done. because there are some things actually that are hidden within this particular TC. And it has to do with something that we're going to be talking about in just a few minutes called the theme adjuster. In its relation, the TCP's relationship with the mixer control panel. Let's go to the right of the TCP and the icon toolbar and talk about this area. Now at the top, we have two rows. We have a regions row and we have a markers row. I'll be speaking about markers and regions in future videos. Suffice to say that regions are objects that indicate a time frame, and markers are objects that indicate an instantaneous point in time, and they're very, very useful in the workflow and editing processes. Now, beneath the markers is what's known as the timeline. And you'll see these funny looking fractions here, right? Well, these are actually measures and beats and then time underneath. We can change the units of this timeline to be more user-friendly for VO work. When we get to a certain point, I'm going to show you how to change this in this video. Now, inside the timeline also, we have this vertical line with this upside-down triangle. This is what's known as the cursor. In this case, it's the edit cursor. And then over here, we have these two triangles with this kind of block between them and then the shaded part underneath. This is the time selection. I use time selections all the time. It's an invaluable part of the editing process. So there's a few ways that we can generate a time selection. We can either drag inside the timeline like that. We can drag inside a clean area within the arrange area, or we can do some double clicking. For example, between the region and the marker. Inside the timeline, you see how it generates a time selection from the end of the region to the marker. I can do it within the region. Now, I can also go beyond the marker. And logic would say that, hey, if I double click right now, that time selection is going to go on to infinity, right? Well, you would be wrong, because at the end of the project, there is actually a hidden marker, always. And so it would always stop there. And I think they put that there specifically because of the time selection, double clicking thing. So anyway, that's how you do a time selection. And now I'm going to put this back over here for future use. Now, beneath the timeline is the area inside Reaper probably where you're going to be spending the most of your time. This is the arrange area. Now, inside the arrange area, in this specific project, we have two things. We have the grid, which are these vertical lines, and they denote units of time or units of songs or whatever. And I can come over here to the icon toolbar, for example, and turn them off and turn them on. For VO work, normally we would have the grid off, to be honest. And we'll be getting into that in future videos. The next thing, which is probably the most important thing within Reaper, to be honest, is what's known as the media item, this thing. This is not the actual file, which this is the file name. It's not the actual file, it's a representation of the file. So I can do things like this. I can bring the cursor over here and then do what's called a split. In other words, I take this one media item and I generate two media items from it. And now I can drag this over here, and I'm going to get rid of the time selection for a second. The media item is the key to how Reaper is able to be what's known as a non-destructive editor. In other words, what I have done is not really manipulated the WAV file itself, but created two windows, if you will, at looking at the WAV file. You see how the title of the WAV file is the same in both media items. So I can do things like this, trimming the right edge of this media item and then dragging this back over here. Now, in destructive DAWs, what I have just done is erased what was there. But in non-destructive DAWs, and I'm not hitting undo, by the way, I can just simply do this, and it's back together again. And that's what's meant by non-destructive. It simply hides what's there. And remember, these media items are only basically representations or windows at looking at the actual WAV file. The only time that a WAV file is really manipulated is in its generation within Reaper, whether you're recording or doing something called stimming or freezing or gluing, which generates another WAV file. But then from that point on, it's never really manipulated to the point where stuff from it is erased. Beneath the TCP and beneath the arrange area is what's known as the transport. Now, the transport contains transport buttons just like any other DAW does. You have play and record and loop and stop and pause, and you have beginning and end and all this good stuff. So Reaper has it there as well. Now, to the right of the transport controls is what's known as the play cursor position. It's play cursor, or it can be edit cursor, depending on what state you're in, so far as recording or playing back or stopped or whatever. And you'll note that they use the same units that the timeline does. Now, this is adjustable. Again, we can right click on it and we can say, instead of using the ruler time unit, we can do our own. Normally, I just right click on the timeline and I set it to minutes and seconds or whatever, and then the play cursor position reflects that. Now, to the right of the play cursor position is what's known as the playback status, but it's more. It's not just playback, it's more like Reaper status. Is Reaper stopped? Is Reaper playing? Is it recording? Is it doing a pre-roll? What is it doing? Then to the right of the playback status, we have the selection parameters. We have the beginning, we have the end, and we have the selection length. And like, for example, we're going from 4.5 seconds to 6 seconds, so we have a length of 1.5 seconds. Now, the next two enable us as voice talent to be able to do punch and roll very effectively. We have what's known as the project tempo, and BPM stands for beats per minute. When we get to the general project settings, I'm going to show you how to permanently set the BPM to 60, for example, which is a beat per second, and then use that along with the time signature to equate one measure to being 1 second. And then in the future punch and roll video, I'm going to show you how to use this to create what's called a pre-roll. The next thing is going to be the global envelope override. Basically, if you're using envelopes like volumes or pens or whatever, then you can override the whole thing with this object. I have really, to be honest, never used it, and I don't know of any voice talent who have. And then finally, the thing that causes many Reaper users confusion, and this is the playback rate control. If it's not set to 1, then you're not listening to it as it's supposed to be. If it's greater than 1, then you start sounding like a chipmunk. And if it's less than 1, then it starts slowing down and you get that, that effect, right? So if you ever find yourself using Reaper and either you sound like a chipmunk or that monster, check the playback rate controller. Make sure it's set to 1.0. And you can double click on the knob, it'll set it to 1.0. And now underneath the transport, is what's known as a Docker. And I know that you're seeing a mixer here, but there's actually a Docker involved. And I can tell that there's a Docker involved by this tab. Only a Docker within Reaper has a tab. Now, what exactly is a Docker? Well, a Docker enables you to do one of two things or both. It allows you to position specific objects within Reaper, or it allows you to have 2 or more objects to share the same real estate within Reaper, or both. And here's what I mean. Let's say that I don't want this mixer here. I want it on the right side of the screen. Well, all I would do is drag the tab. And as I'm dragging, you see that rectangle appear. And now watch what happens as I approach the right side of the screen. Bam. You see how it elongates? And then once I release the left mouse button, the mixer is now on the right side of the screen. This is how we position things. But let's take it a step further. Let's say that I don't want this mixer here, but I want it to be at the top, and I want it to be able to share the same real estate as, say, the effects browser. Well, I would take the tab for the mixer, and I would drag it to the top and release, and now the mixer is at the top. Then what I would do is I would say View and Effects Browser, and normally yours would be a floating window, if you will. Now, how do we get it docked? Well, we can right-click on the title bar and say Dock Effects Browser in the Docker. And now it's sharing the same real estate as the mixer. Now, notice something about the mixer, though. There's so much real estate here that could be used for other things, right? Wouldn't it be better if the effects browser were here somewhere? Well, you can do that. It's very easily. Just drag the effects browser tab over, and you'll see that the Docker drag rectangle, whatever you want to call it, it only spans half the screen, not the full screen like it did with the mixer. Now, whenever I release, watch what happens. Now, all of a sudden, the effects browser is in its own Docker, separate for the mixer. But even with that, there's still so much real estate here. Let's say that maybe I want to do video work, let's say. And further, let's say that I want the video over here to the right, but I want the effects browser in between the mixer and the video. Well, what I can do is I can drag the boundary between the two Dockers and do this. And now I can go to view and where's video? Video. And now you'll see video is in its own Docker over here to the right. Now I can right click on it and say, don't dock, but then I can say dock again and it's back. That's how you go from docking to floating window and back. But let's say now I drag this tab and I drag it to the upper right-hand corner. Notice that the Docker drag rectangle, again, whatever you want to call it, spans the width, but it doesn't even cover half. This is telling me that it's going to go in the upper right-hand corner, but it's going to be in its own Docker. And whenever I release, there we are. Now, let's say that through experience, the video doesn't have to be in its own. It could share with the effects browser. All I'd have to do is drag the tab over to the effects browser. And now the effects browser and the video share the same real estate again. This is the power of a Docker. It is incredibly powerful. All right, let me get this thing back to where it was. And one other thing, while I'm thinking about it, believe it or not, the transport bar is in a Docker. If I right-click anywhere in this clean space, say here somewhere, I see dock transport in main window, or dock transport in its own Docker, or I can say dock transport position. The reason why I'm showing you this is because many other DAWs, they have the transport at the very top of the window. Well, you can set Reaper up to do that. All you have to do is do the dock transport position and say top of main window, and now the transport is at the top. That's really, really cool. That's the power of Dockers. Okay, I'm going to put it back where it was here. Okay, now let's talk about the MCP, or the Mixer Control Panel. This one has two tracks in it. It has a master track and it has a channel track. Out of the box in a new project, you won't actually have this new track. And when we get to recording in Reaper, I'll show you how to generate a track. But you'll see that for a great many things, it's a mirror of the TCP. For example, if I click on this record arm for this channel track, and you'll see that it turns red and that the VU meter is hopping nicely. Then if we come over to the TC over here, we'll see the same thing. If I unrecord arm, we'll see that it's unrecord armed in the MCP. Same thing for mute, same thing for solo. Now, you'll note, for example, there's a route button in here, but there is no route button in the TC. Also, you'll note there's a lot of real estate here that seems to be hiding something, and you would be right. Again, when we record arm, you'll see how there's some stuff, and when we unrecord arm, it disappears. This has to do with what's known as the theme adjuster, which is new for version 6. And to get to it, we go to Options, we go to Themes, and we go to the theme adjuster. And here it is. Just a cursory look at it, you'll think that this is no big deal, but it's an extremely powerful new thing with version 6. If we click this right arrowhead, you can actually do some controls with the TCP. For example, let's say we're in layout A, which is what we are in right now. Okay, if the mixer is visible, we could hide things simply by clicking on hide, or we can click on hide and unhide it, making it visible. I'll show you that in a second. If the track is not selected, what to hide. If the track is not armed, what to hide. And then you have always hide regardless of what's going on, whether the mixer is visible, whether the track's selected, whether it's armed or not, whatever the case may be, I always want to hide it. Now, remember in the MCP, we have here the route button. Notice if the mixer is visible, they have hidden the routing button in the TCP. But supposing I want the routing button there always, well, I would just simply click on hide to unhide it, and there it is. And not only that, but did you notice that the effects button, like that, moved to make way for the route button? So there is going to be some adjustment when things get hidden or unhidden. We have something for the MCP as well, and we have something for custom colors and all that, and envelopes even, which we're going to be getting into in a whole series of videos here for envelopes. This theme adjuster is extremely powerful, so be careful how you use it, to quote a 1970s advertisement, I think. Anyway, in the next video, we'll be looking at some settings which will make Reaper even more VO friendly. Don't forget that there's a link in the description below to the Windows-centric playlist. And if you're watching this far, thank you for watching. And this is Steven Gonzalez with Steven Gonzalez Voiceovers, wishing y'all all the best. And y'all have a wonderful and wonder-filled day.